others. Today, we are going to be presenting Robin Fulford to all of you today. She is the candidate for the Texas 2nd Congressional District, which covers the northeast suburbs of Houston. Her opponent is Dan Crenshaw, Representative Dan Crenshaw, actually. And she is running against him, and she's running for Congress because she believes that Texas deserves better than the current political environment. So welcome, Robin. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your platform?
Sure. So I grew up outside of Baltimore, and my mom is a retired nurse, father's a retired teacher, and I've talked about this a lot, but it's really, I think, important to understanding who I am as a person. My grandmother was a coal miner's daughter in West Virginia, got her first pair of glasses thanks to unions, and never let us forget that. And so this was really part of the character building that happened as a kid. We would boycott in support of agricultural workers. And so I remember my mom working to unionize nurses in Baltimore and the union busting that happened. And I remember all of those things. Those are part of my makeup. Then I went to school in California, graduated from UCLA, ended up in Texas, and I've lived in Texas for about half of my life. I worked a career in elder care. And so actually at that point when I was working in elder care, I sort of knew that I would end up needing to do something more on that because I saw that we had limited resources for the need at that point. And I retired from that career about 12 years ago to be a full-time stay-at-home mom and raise my 2 children here in the district, in Congressional District 2 in the Woodlands. So I was a full-time volunteer in the community for over a decade. I was president of Mothers of the Woodlands, a mothers group. I was room mom, all of those things that I think a lot of the viewers can relate to. But I was always very engaged. I was engaged politically in college. I was raised to be politically engaged and mindful. And so many of us got really pushed to come out after Trump was elected. And as a mom, I had to explain to my children, my son, who's now 12, my daughter is now 7, what I would do. Because this man that he had identified as a bully was elected and what I was going to do. And I said, I will do everything in my power to protect people we care about from policy we knew would harm them and the rhetoric that already was. And that's kind of what propelled me forward. I started organizing, became a Democratic voter precinct chair in Harris County. There I realized that we were at a disadvantage because we didn't have a club or a PAC. And so I started Democratic Club of the Woodlands with my friend, my co-founder, Jennifer Blackman. And we really got engaged and organized. And I wanted people to be out and proud of our values. I couldn't understand why people were allowing the party of Roy Moore to be allowed and we weren't. And so that was really my first push, was to get people to stand up for our values. Let's not let Democrats be the boogeymen and women. We are part of the fabric of this district, of this community, and we have a whole lot to be proud of. And so that's kind of where I came at all of this. I had to decide if I was going to be quiet to get along or if I was going to be a role model to my children. And I was never going to be quiet to get along.
Yeah, I understand that problem completely.
Yes.
Just a little bit. So I totally get it. So tell us a little bit about just your district. tell us a little bit of the priorities for the constituents in your district that you want to represent, and what is it like living in your district? Because you guys are actually known for being quite red. So what are you seeing on the ground right now? What is important to your constituents there?
So my district now includes all of the Woodlands. It still includes Kingwood, Humble, and parts of Spring now. So it does include parts of Montgomery County where previously it didn't. It also dips down to Channelview to Baytown. And so this district was made a little bit, they wanted to make it a little bit more safe for Dan Crenshaw. They did cut his home address out of the district. They could have made it more solid and didn't. And what I have felt, and people I respect who have done organizing alongside me for a long time, all feel that Republicans really made a bad bet with this district, because we do have a lot of really motivated organizers that have been on the ground and working with each other for some time. And we have a lot of purple precincts. The Woodlands has long been thought of as the area that was going to flip first when we talk about Montgomery County, that this area would. We have a thriving medical complex. Exxon moved their campus, which brought a lot of diversity to the area, but we see that all over the district. And so when I have talked to people with the DCCC or even our state Democratic Party chair, what I notice is that this district has some of the most motivated organizers. There has not been a major investment in turning out our vote. I know the voters in the district everywhere I go. I have people that used to kind of give me secret like hand signals that they're Democrats are now really coming out and starting to realize their power. So just like throughout history, convincing everybody that this district or these areas are so red that there's no hope, that is how our power has been really kept from us. So when we think that we are alone, we don't go out and vote. We don't run for office. Once we realize that there are so many more of us than anybody wanted us to know, we have power. And you know this, Nancy, in Texas, and I say this a lot, nobody believes in Texas Democrats as much as Texas Republicans. And we see that because of all of the efforts to suppress the vote. If there were not so many of us, they would not be working so hard to keep us from registering to vote or getting to the polls or having our ballots even count with the mail-in ballot fiasco. So I see so much opportunity here. I always was approaching this race as, I'm committed to this work, whether it's one cycle or more. The work in my mind is much the same, since it is a two-year elected position. So it's a 2-year cycle. So if you're running for office, my job is to build coalitions and relationships to get elected. But once elected, my job is to build coalitions and bring people in so that people are really and truly involved in policy, because our elected officials have the unique opportunity and power that we vest in them to improve our lives. And to do that, community needs to be involved and to be very connected with their representative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought out some really good points that if we do have this enormous power, and if they did, obviously the Republicans do know it, because they are doing nothing but trying to shut us up and belittle us and make us not show up to the polls and make it harder for us to vote. So obviously they do know. So so I hope everybody who's watching this can listen to that and hear it and just and understand that we have a really good opportunity right now.
And to further hammer that point, so much has happened that we tend to forget. I tend to forget. And that's part of the machine that has been so successful with the right-wing extremists. There's so much has happened that we forget. But in 2020, remember that Donald Trump had exterior mailboxes removed from post offices. That happened at our post office. I remember it quite well. During a pandemic, the most populous county, Harris County, more residents than 26 states, had the Abbott had moved to make one drop box per county. And it was because of all of the efforts in Harris County to make voting accessible for registered voters. So we have to really keep that in mind. All of those efforts made after Texas already had some of the worst voter suppression in the country. So that I want us to really keep in mind that they know our power. We have to know our power. Do not get discouraged. It's all about getting out to vote. If there is, if anybody can make an excuse to allow themselves not to vote, that tends to happen. Even friends of mine that I talk to all the time, and then, well, they just didn't get around to it. We all have to commit to making sure that we completely take our power and use it, and that's to vote.
So I did notice something the other day. So we were on that 2 Million Texans app, and you were on the leaderboard the other day.
Yes.
So you've been working that leaderboard really, really hard. I just want to tell you, I saw your name up there. So
thank you. Because I'm an organizer, and I'm always thinking about, okay, so when we're having conversations, the most effective conversations we have are with people that know us. Those are our spheres of influence, right? And so it was a natural extension of that when my friend Shri Kulkarni told me about the program. I was excited because I immediately understood how powerful that is. And so because I think it's powerful, I want to make sure that anything I'm doing, if I'm telling other people that they should do it, I want to make sure that I'm doing it as well. Always led like that. I've always made sure I'm the one that's block walking. I'm the one that's doing that work on phone banking. I'm doing the legwork and not just telling people what they should do. It's important to me. So I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah, I absolutely did. So one of the things that I also noticed was that there's a lot of things going on there in Houston this week, and in particularly in your area, and that is from the far right this week with the Texas Youth Summit. So can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there with the Texas Youth Summit?
So so this is something that has happened. It's been going on for a few years, and they'll have different versions, several times in the year. There was one, I think, in February before the election. And my opponent, Dan Crenshaw, has been a panelist in the past and is on their current website. And what it really is, ultimately, it's a way for some elected officials or people within the political space to make money, to come in and make money off of a community, right? They do a lot of fundraising off of it. And so this one is marketed as the Texas Youth Summit, and it was supposed to be focused on youth. Notably, the speakers are not terribly young. They had like Candace Owens, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was here for 2 days, which is a little shocking because this is not her district. That's a lot of time to be spending in one area. But they bring everybody in, and it's not to teach the youth about the power of their vote or all of the things that I typically think of when I think of some of the events that we might have. It was a lot of fear mongering. It was disturbing. I listened to it and I was so disappointed at the amount of hate that was being infused, and hate that we then see in our communities, of kids being told that members of the LGBTQIA+ community are evil or satanic. It was so disturbing to me. And then on top of that, Ken Paxton had come in, and he was talking about how he prosecutes pedophiles. But interestingly enough, one of their panelists who was on the panel in 2020 with Dan Crenshaw, and who was again invited this year, but I guess disinvited and scrubbed, was Luke Bowen. And Luke Bowen was the political director for Texas Right to Life. And he was arrested for online solicitation of a minor. And then James McCoy was a scheduled panelist, and he was arrested, I guess it was 2 weekends ago, in College Station for a DWI, for having a firearm in his car, and he had an inebriated 18-year-old college freshman, and James is 36. This happened. Then on top of that, and remember everyone, this is the Texas Youth Summit. They had Matt Gaetz, and Matt Gaetz we know, who has very serious allegations against him involving sex trafficking. And in the news yesterday, I saw that a former Trump aide said in his testimony that that sex trafficking accusation of having intercourse or rape of a minor, that he had asked for a preemptive pardon for that as well. And so these are people that the GOP is bringing in to our district to speak to our children. And it's not appropriate. It's not building the community that I know that we have. And thankfully, it didn't seem all that well attended, but it breaks my heart, because my kids go to school in this district. I know the kids in this district. I know the kids throughout, and this is not a part of our culture. And it's really poisonous to everything that we're doing. So
it's very disturbing. I have to say, it's really disturbing. I actually, as a youth, I was Republican, and I would go to these Republican little events, and I always attended seminars on how to guarantee that Social Security was going to be there when I retired. I went to a seminar on women's rights, and it didn't include abortion. It was about the rights for women, and it was part of like the Republican platform. So it's kind of crazy that this is how far they've gone. It's really nice to think about.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene said that Anthony Fauci was creating disease to kill people.
That's just a lie.
It's just a lie. And she's a sitting member of Congress.
Yeah.
That to me, that is, I mean, I use this term a lot. It's conduct unbecoming of a congressperson. And it truly is. I mean, that's not what I expect. That's not what I have ever expected, no matter what party you're representing, because ultimately you are there to be representing the people and the interests of the people in the United States, country over party.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Dobbs, because you would be in a unique position if you won, that you would be able to vote for some of these bills that they want to pass next year. This last week, we just heard Lindsey Graham talk about passing abortion laws across the entire country and codifying it for the entire country.
Yeah.
And that was really, really disturbing. So can you tell us about some of your positions on women's rights and what you would like to say about what is happening right now in the current environment towards women?
Yeah, so I'm staunchly pro-choice. I support abortion. I am I was in front of the Supreme Court actually about 10 days before the decision was given. And at that point, there was a rumor that it was going to be overturned. And I went in front of the Supreme Court, and all of the media was there, and there were different activist groups. And I was saying to anybody that would listen, let Texas be the litmus test, the test case for conservative policy gone wrong. Because in Texas, because we've had such restrictive abortion laws already pass, and we had the 6-week ban pass, we already know that that affects more than people that voters are having in mind, right? More than people that are choosing abortion. It's affecting the healthcare of people across the board. And so I was frustrated because I wanted the media to pick up on more of these stories. However, also, these stories are very personal. So as you know, as we're talking about abortion and we're talking about a woman's healthcare, it's incredible because we're having to open up some of the most personal experiences of our lives and plead with people to see the humanity. And this happens in all different areas of policy. This happens in areas of racial justice and social justice. But it's painful. And what we're seeing is the Republicans have absolutely stated that they were going for a federal ban. I see with Democrats so much, we like to really see the best in people. We really like to not quite believe it's as bad as it's going to be until we're shown. It's the beauty and also it's the downside. And so I've wanted people to recognize that abortion is very much like our right to choose is very much under attack on a federal level. That had always been the plan. It's an emergency. It really is. If you live in a blue state and you are taking some sort of solace that at least you have access, or maybe you could help somebody in another state come to yours, you cannot sit and idle and think that that is going to be an option. When Lindsey Graham brought that up this week, and we all knew it was coming and flirted with, Mitch McConnell had stated it right after the overturn. What he's saying is, so he wants to talk about 15 weeks. And he's using that as leverage so that people will say, well, okay, so Republicans are sort of reasonable, because people across the board are absolutely not okay with the complete ban on abortion. But more people were kind of okay and could see the 15 ban be reasonable, or that it, at least they're making, then at least if it's to save the life of the mother, it could be okay. But how about the health of the mother? How about the health of the person who's pregnant? And what you need to remember is they're throwing out these different markers. I was just told this week by somebody that, oh, that's just a jumping off point. But in Texas, we first passed the 20-week abortion ban, then the 6-week abortion ban, then the trigger ban went into effect, where there is a total ban. And that is really and truly what is on the menu. And government should not be making these decisions. They should not be coming in and making decisions on our reproductive health care. It creates inequality. It's demeaning. We know all of those things, right? But they are absolutely targeting that. My opponent, Dan Crenshaw, has sort of flown under the radar on this, but he is in fact funding anti-choice Republicans across the entire country. He has used his fundraising prowess and some of his fame to be able to really put a dent in some of these races. He max donates to anti-choice federal candidates and candidates in state legislatures. And he's also a co-sponsor of federal legislation that is a ban, that is a copy of the Texas abortion law that passed last year. So
yeah, it's a mess. It's absolutely a mess. And it's really important that we vote in as many Democrats right now, as we can. Pro-choice Democrats and stuff. Yeah. I'm not not the other guys. There's a few of those in San Antonio area that are like pro-choice Democrats, which is just dumbfounding. But anyway, so let's learn a little bit more about you. And one of the other hot topics right now in Texas is guns, and you are a gun violence survivor. And just a warning for anybody who might get triggered, just a trigger warning here. But let's talk about what your positions are as a survivor from gun violence and what you think we should be doing as the state of Texas and also on a federal level.
Right. So it was weird because I didn't really recognize that I was a survivor of gun violence until one of my friends, who's a leader with Moms Demand, had pointed it out, because I had survived a carjacking at gunpoint. But my position on guns, I mean, people on the right like to accuse me of being afraid of guns or I'm anti to it, and that's simply not true. I was formerly married to a Marine. I learned how to shoot guns on Camp Pendleton from Marines. I am a good shot, but I also support responsible gun ownership, as do most Americans and most Texans. I believe that we need to close loopholes for background checks. It's all of the stuff that we've talked about for a long time, right? I support red flag laws with the understanding that, that is a delicate area of policy because we are making judgments on people. I understand that, but we need to have ways to intervene in emergencies. Also, safe storage laws, I stand behind. Now, when I talk to people about this often, there's a pushback on, criminals don't abide by laws, but our laws are the tools that law enforcement have to intervene. So if we do not have those laws and there's some suspicious behavior, then we are giving law enforcement no ability to intervene. And that's really what this is about. Most people understand that that's what this is about, but we need to make sure that we bring that up over and over and make that clear. Most people that I talk to who are staunchly 2A supporters will come up with all of these ideas that they would support, as long as it's not coming from somebody they think is a Democrat that's going to take their gun. I do think we have to raise the age to buy some of our firearms to 25. I do support a ban on assault rifles. I'm not saying that I support coming to houses and confiscating guns. That's not where I stand. But if we don't put some limitations on this, then the only barrier to some of these weapons is money. So who's to say that some other form of, a deadly force becomes accessible because it's now affordable? What are we going to turn into? How is that going to snowball? And so that's really how I think about these issues. Gun violence is not just mass shootings. Though, of course, I was at my child's 5th grade graduation when the notification popped up that the shooting in Uvalde happened. So that happened. It was jarring. I was the only one in the room that, as my son was about to walk across the stage, knew what was happening. And my opponent then doubled down on his guns for everybody stance after Uvalde. And we have to come together and do something. The gun culture, a lot of people like to blame the NRA and the money of the NRA, which, yes, has been influential, especially in the past. But what I see is far more powerful is the idea that we need to have guns, that we need to arm ourselves against each other, that we see every person as a potential enemy. And that is what concerns me most. But when we have most Americans that agree on gun legislation and we can't get that passed, we could talk about other things and get other things passed, but we can't touch guns, then that is telling me that our elected representatives are actually not representing the people. And that's a problem. So when our representatives are not representing people, they need to be replaced.
Yeah, absolutely. 110%. Okay, so let's talk about education next. It's a big issue. It's a big issue here in Texas. The Texas system has obviously been starving the ISDs, right, and it's creating chaos and havoc all over Texas. But even more so than that, we're also seeing a lot of misuse of funds that are being sent from the federal government to the state government, and misuse of that, which is a little bit concerning because I kind of have a suspicion that a lot of this money is going towards the border issue right now. So, and it's being misused by Governor Abbott. So wanted to see what your positions are on education and what you could do to impact education on a federal level.
Yeah, so it is tricky because some of those issues are decided upon by our state governments. And so, that's why our elections, of course, at the governor level, lieutenant governor and on down are so important, and the state legislature that decides a lot of how things are allocated. But I think that it's really important that we remind ourselves that in this country, the reason we have a public education system is because we understand that opportunity and having that education, it creates a stronger workforce and a populace that's able to really compete and really on a global scale, that we're setting people up for success. And so I support universal pre-K. I think that that's really important. I know that that public education is important, and I support it at every step of the way. It's also why I'll support federal student loan forgiveness and programs like that, because so much of this is predatory. We do need to reform how we are approving student loans. Some of the changes that were made have really impacted us. And we've seen, non-accredited for-profit schools flourish, and to the detriment of our people. And so those are all initiatives that I support. And Beto has talked a lot about the decay of the education system in Texas, and how outside businesses that are invited to Texas are not hiring their high-skilled jobs from the people in Texas because our workforce is not at the level that these employers need. So they are bringing people from out of state in. And these are things that we can tackle. And I know that my job on the federal level is a little different from what you're talking about, but I think it's important that all leadership work together on this and that we show that it's a real value. And I do believe that education should be based in fact and not swayed or changed by political dogma.
Yeah, I think you brought up some great points. It's one of the points that actually I pointed out recently, and on a podcast and also in another webinar, and that is the fact that right now in Texas, especially in West Texas, a lot of these energy companies, they cannot find enough qualified workers because Texas is not currently educating their population to a level in which we can fill some of these jobs. So it isn't even just the companies that are moving here from California. It's also some local places that are locally owned here in Texas, and they cannot find enough educated, qualified workforce workers to come and work for them because our education system needs a lot of help and we're not producing, which is no excuse. We have no excuse whatsoever.
Right.
We certainly have enough population, but you know, we have people that are not thinking strategically and looking forward enough to those points.
We have a lot of people on all levels that are convincing Americans that we can't afford to invest in people. And they're holding the money and rewarding people at the top. And that's happening. And it affects people in all areas of our lives, convincing people we can't afford universal health care, but we can afford to give these huge tax breaks to businesses to come in and pilfer from us. Education is in that arena. There are people locally to me and people within the local Republican Party who rail against public education. We know that that's being attacked, but who have said that things like we shouldn't even have air conditioning in our government buildings, and everything is kind of pulled back and there's such bare bones. And ultimately, if you look at the pattern and you look at some of what the Republican Party in Texas has put forth for years, is really a plan to defund public education. And if anybody that has been paying attention and followed Empower Texans, and there's all kinds of different forms that all of that money has taken shape of, was to defund public education, to defund fire, and to defund police. And actually, that has been the goal. They ultimately only believe that government should pay for military.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I noticed many years ago, is that they have been defunding the police and defunding our systems and defunding our local government this entire time. Mm-hmm. And so they have really changed a lot of their positions from having strong local governments to coming in like the big strong man from state government and sort of having more power over the local governments. Because I've never seen a government sue other Texans like I have recently, other Texas governments. Like we have Greg Abbott suing, Paris, Texas, and we have Greg Abbott suing Austin, Texas. And that's just crazy to me.
Or other states for their elections and in an attempt to overturn elections. And my opponent had signed on to some of that.
So let's talk about your opponent, and let's talk about his role with the big lie. Yeah. And let's talk about his role with the Tea Party. And currently there seems to be a lot of fractures to the current Republican Party right now. And it's very interesting to see how they're fracturing out. We definitely see him and Marjorie Taylor Greene having some back and forth online. But do you think, like, currently we have a Republican Party at war with itself? Do you think any of this war that we're seeing online, do you think it's impacting how Republicans in Texas are going to vote this November?
I think it's impacting. So here's what I've noticed. A lot of that is for show. Dan Crenshaw will fight with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but then they'll fight and they'll get a bunch of Twitter traction or social media traction. And then Dan Crenshaw will propose a bill that was really aimed at preventing private companies from being able to make decisions about what they'll have on their platform, when, like Twitter, removing elected officials from the platform. And that was Team Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so I see this over and over again with them. It's sort of, they ultimately are on the same side. They kind of have these power struggles, And that's what I've concluded it really is. It's all power struggles within the party. It's not a morality struggle. It's not a policy point struggle. It's a power struggle. And my opponent made a lot of money from SNL fame. I've joked and said that Pete Davidson appointed my opponent to his position. But he got a lot of celebrity from that. And so that has been a threat to people within the party, but it has not really shaped where he's gone. He's had a skilled campaign operatives behind him that has made him seem reasonable at some moments, but he is an extremist. He voted with Trump 90% of the time. He has backed up every part of the big lie except for voting to validate the vote. But he has talked back and forth on that ever since. He went on CNN about 3 weeks ago and defended the former president. He knowingly misrepresented what happened and he said very skillfully, to my knowledge, the raid that the FBI, when they were serving the search warrant, was the first time that the former president was asked to return documents. Patently false, provably false. But he said that. He called into question the FBI and the DOJ when some of his colleagues are having their lives threatened. So it's a game that they play. And this is not a game. Politics is about people. People's lives are impacted by this. The people with the least power and the least means, their lives are impacted by the policy we create the very most. And to me, that's an enormous responsibility. It's a privilege. It's an enormous responsibility. And if you are in public service, that is always at the forefront of your mind. When one thing that Marjorie Taylor Greene said on Friday night was, and I think she said this before, but it just hit me. She said, Congress is a lot like high school. Congress is not supposed to be a lot like high school. You are there to do a job, to serve the people in your community. If you are going to this Turning Point USA and CPAC and the Texas Youth Summit or Crenshaw's Youth Summit competing for money, it's showmanship. You're making money off a political celebrity, but that's not the job. The job is to serve public, to improve the lives of Americans. And so the Tea Party, while they may have some of those games and may appear fractured, they're not. They're kind of, they made a bet and they're betting on, much of them are betting on Trump policy. But to your point, what's happening with voters is I have a whole lot of support from people who either no longer consider themselves Republicans, still consider themselves conservative, but who are so sick and tired of the extremism and the gamesmanship when we have real things that we can tackle and people know it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was also a couple things that came up with Dan Crenshaw recently, and one of them is his very sketchy stock buys and trades that have been happening. Where he seemed to have benefited from things and maybe knowledge that he knows of internally based on his position. So is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yes, I support having members of Congress no longer be able to do that, whether it's a blind trust situation. That's improper. We've seen people from my party as well that have made money where it's trended up and it's abnormal, making trades before the fact. And that can't happen. And in fact, when my opponent was talking about it, he said something along the lines of, well, if members of Congress can't enrich themselves, then who would do this? Well, that's the point. So we need members of Congress and elected representatives who are there to serve the public good. I want to throw this back to when Ted Cruz left Texas during our freeze, right? And I think it was maybe Al Franken that said that it was amazing to him because in those emergencies, it's one of the times where, as an elected official, you get to be the solution. You get to fix that. You could get to be with people face to face and actually physically showing up and helping people. That's everything to me. That's why I decided to get involved in politics. That is on this level. That's what inspires me. And so if you're in it and saying you would never do this, who would do this if they couldn't enrich themselves? Then I think you're telling us that you should not be in that position.
Yeah, 100%. So where was Dan Crenshaw during the freeze? Do you know what was?
I actually don't know where he was during the freeze.
He's probably with John Cornyn somewhere.
Maybe. I think John Cornyn made that rare steak that everybody made fun of him for posting pictures of.
No, he didn't even do that. He was in Utah, I think. He wasn't even in Texas for the bad one. Yeah,
I don't know, because I had lost electricity. I lost electricity, and Conroe is where the little boy who was 11 years old, same age as my son was, had died because he froze to death. So I was focused on outsourcing and trying to figure out how we were going to reach out and protect people. And I have friends who are of all different parties, all different political persuasions, who staff at the school that little boy went to.
Wow.
So
let's talk about the next news item of the week and what we should be doing about it. So let's talk about the border stunt from Greg Abbott and DeSantis.
Yep.
And them actually using Texas money to basically do a stunt and trying to override a responsibility that's actually part of the federal government. So what is your position on what we should be doing about the border and some solutions?
So with the border, that is the issue that a lot of Republicans in this district, my opponent, like to point to the border and get everybody hysterical about this invasion, using data about fentanyl being seized as somehow an indication that there's failure to seize fentanyl. It's interesting.
Because it's working, right? If they seize it, it's actually working.
Right. So aside from all of that, they like to use, so from Title 42, which was not immigration reform, that was a temporary order to help contain COVID, the spread of COVID. Well, that allowed for recidivism, for people to make more than one appearance. And so that is reflected in our data. And so it looks like we have a huge influx of people trying to enter our country. And it is including all of those repeat attempts that typically would not be in those numbers. So it looks like it has just really escalated. And so the Republicans use that inflated data, knowingly use that to create hysteria around it. My question is, if this is an illegitimate concern, why are they knowingly misusing that data? Why not use the real numbers? So that's one. But also, we can pass immigration reform. We can do that. Or Democrats have tried to do that over years. We can do that. This is all theatrics as a distraction. So in my district, I'll be at events and Republicans will yell about the border, get people to be really scared that people are going to come into their homes and threaten their lives. And it's a distraction because there are people in that room, in our community, in Congressional District 2, which is nowhere near the border, whose lives are impacted right now by no access to healthcare, by people making decisions to go without healthcare because they can't afford it. And that is an emergency that's happening right now. But Republicans won't deal with healthcare. They want to point to the border. And so that stunt, and I was listening to this stunt, and somebody had pointed out to me, a Republican I was talking to last weekend said, it's calling liberals and Democrats on their bluff, that people are welcome here. Well, there's more to that, of course, because we've done some digging, and we know now that the migrants, the asylum seekers who were going through the legal processes and sent to Martha's Vineyard, that they were sent there when they had appointments, immigration appointments, some of them in San Antonio on the 19th, that these are people that were sent there and told, you're going here, this is part of the process, misled, so that they intentionally miss their appointments. Some of them, others were, their address change were submitted to random places all across the country. And then they'd have to miraculously appear at those new immigration appointments to false addresses that were given for them. So if this is an earnest desire to get Democrats to talk about border issues and pass immigration reform, then why all of these games? This is a stunt. If it was a genuine desire, all of these things, we wouldn't be finding all of these things happening that were actually behind the scenes. And it's ultimately seeing people as pawns, because again, to them, politics is a game.
Absolutely, 110%. I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to ask how we could help you. So we could just probably make this one pretty quick. Climate change is coming. It's coming at us fast. Before we let you go, I want to ask you what some of your positions are on climate change, because it's, I don't think Texans are taking this seriously enough. And you might be in a position in federal government to make some headway there. So wanted to see what your positions are.
Yeah. So climate change is, so I live in a very energy centric, oil and gas centric area, and a suburb of Houston, built by George Mitchell, who was founder of Mitchell Energy. And so I understand the industry really well. The really neat thing I think that we have right now happening is there is an opportunity for Democrats to grow and lead on energy policy as we incentivize the transition. That's happening. That's the new frontier. We have carbon capture technology. We have all of these new innovative ways to help combat climate change. And we can do that. There's so much of the industry that translates. We have to get out there really powerfully and join together and talk about that. This also is an area that we're able to really curtail how Republicans talk about it, because a lot of them are still being funded by what I like to call the dinosaurs in fossil fuels, who don't need to innovate. They're just trying to hold on to money. Climate change is real. I know retired Exxon execs, Chevron, nobody here thinks that it's not the emergency that it is. We do need to build out our infrastructure for electric vehicles. That has to happen. We have to have the will to do that. And I think that it's important to have members of Congress that really do have a good understanding of the energy industry grounded in this area, but who are also, wanting to do things to help modify consumer behavior, get people, to embrace the transition. And we will see the volatility of the market with the price of gasoline and fossil fuels and production. And one of the ways to help and mitigate that is to really grow renewables. When we talk about the freeze that happened in Texas, my opponent and a lot of the Texas Republicans said that renewables were the ones that had failed, and actually they outperformed what was expected. And so that's not true. And we have such an opportunity to lead on this. And it's really important to me. I have 2 children, and my 12-year-old and my 7-year-old ask about this constantly. So yes, I support pricing carbon. I would like to see that as the dividend and have part of that be reinvested into carbon technology. And I think that we need to look at this as a really exciting new frontier of American innovation.
Absolutely. One of the things that really bothers me the most about Texas is the fact that they're not taking a vision for what Texas could be in a green energy future. Because I think that there's so much potential for us. I was really surprised I don't know if you read the Republican platform, but I reread it last night just for fun before I went to bed. Because that's what I do, because I'm a total nerd. But anyway, so I read it last night and I was like, I read this line. I was like, this can't be true. They have a line in there about how they are not, no state funding or even federal funding will go towards the building of a speed train across Texas.
Right. Which is insane. On so many ways, but if we want to be competitive, we are lagging behind. We are really lagging behind. And so if we want to be competitive, that's the thing that I hear from people. I mean, of all different parties, this is not a partisan issue unless so much of that platform is it is why, quite frankly, I am getting so much support from Republicans. I'm proud of my democratic values. I believe wholeheartedly that democratic policy serves everybody. So I'm not pandering and dumbing it down. It's just an exhaustion of what? This is it makes no sense.
Yeah. Sometimes I just want to take Texans and say, okay, let's go and take a virtual tour of Dubai. Let's go take a virtual tour of, some like Beijing and Shanghai and like some of these larger areas that have these really state-of-the-art cities. State-of-the-art public transportation. And then here we are. Healthcare. We have healthcare.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It is that being convinced that this is as good as it could get, being convinced we can't possibly do these things. That's why we're stuck. And I was on an airplane and the kid sitting next to me is this 25-year-old kid that is a student at A&M, and he's Indian, and he was telling me that he flies home for his healthcare because it's cheaper and he just can't vote. And it's just all of those things. And I said, it's just so interesting, right? Because when you talk to Americans, they don't even they have accepted that your healthcare costs could just, it could eclipse you. You might one day be desolate because you had a surgery you didn't expect. And we've just accepted it. So it's really having to change that baseline, but further than that. And I think it just wraps up everything that we were talking about. People, Democrats included, have really not fully understood or have forgotten that our elected officials are there to improve our lives, and they are not, in fact, entertainers. So when people like Congressman Dan Crenshaw say, how about more adoption and less abortion? Well, you, sir, if you really believe that, where are your bills to make adoption more accessible? So it's like people have gotten out of the habit of expecting things. And so that, to me, is an important part of why once you are elected to office, your job is not just you are elected and you go off and you come back sometimes. You are bringing people into these policy discussions because it's important that people understand that things like a speed rail, that how these affect all of the parts of our lives. So stuff doesn't seem abstract and we can all actually move together into the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So where can we find you online and how can we best support you and your campaign right now in this election season during these next 6 weeks?
Yes. Okay. So the worst part of running for office is having to fundraise. So I absolutely do need donations to my campaign. And you're a donor at $5, you're a donor at $10, you're a donor at $2,900 if you want to max out. But my website is fulfordforcongress.com, and that's F as in freedom, UL, F as in freedom, ORD as in democracy, Fulford for Congress. And then on social media, I am Robin with an I, Fulford TX, and I am that on all social media. So helping to promote me on social media is good. I definitely need help with block walking. I love block walking. It's my favorite thing. I love knocking on people's doors and conversing with voters. And so I'd love people to join along with me in that. Phone banking. Also, please join the 2 Million Texans program and reach, because that is not just setting up me for success or other candidates. That is building out our network so that we can actually really make a change.
Okay, Robin, and we will hopefully see you on the campaign trail in a couple weeks, okay?
Yes, I'll see you.
Okay, take care. Have a great night. Bye.